So welcome, I'm Ron Fleming, a certified leadership coach, and today I'd like to talk with you about leadership coaching. And I've asked Shannon Trilly, a leader that I've worked with, to join me for this conversation to talk about what leadership coaching has been like for her. So welcome, Shannon. Really glad to have you with us today, and look forward to this conversation together.
I'm very happy to be here.
So maybe we could just start with when you started with leadership coaching. Say a little bit about yourself, the situation you found yourself in, and what you were looking for.
Yes, well, there were two major factors that led to me really seeking a coach. The first was I was a relatively young manager who was just given a significant promotion. And while I was thrilled with the opportunity, I was a bit overwhelmed with what it would mean in terms of my own working style and leadership style, and the ambitious part of me wanted to be an excellent leader as quickly as possible. And I knew I would need some support for that. Secondly, at that time, I became a leader within a group of peers who were probably also looking to advance and achieve. And so I intuitively knew that my relationship as a peer to people who I would now manage would need some delicate handling, and that I would need a place to process that and get some advice and guidance on managing that in myself. So my relationships and my very rapid opportunity advancement led to me seeking coaching.
So let's talk a little bit about the coaching process itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we met like every other week or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would do work in between time. And I'm wondering if maybe, is there a metaphor or an image which comes to you about what the time was like? Like, what is it? You describe kind of the work you were working on. Like, what was our coaching engagement like for you?
Well, first, in terms of the rhythm of the coaching, I would say we started with you and I talking about my goals, and then you actually meeting with people in my organization, mostly the supervisors and those that had given me the promotion, but also wanted to see me grow. And I think jointly setting those goals and benchmarks and naming the strengths and weaknesses was really helpful to start the journey and refer back to over time. But my favorite metaphor from when we worked together or for the journey of coaching was really one you gave me of walking through maybe a more organic forest, and the challenging times were when you're on kind of this walk and you lean over and you pick up a rock, and under the rock are these worms that really are the heart of decomposing this very rich forest. And while it might be helpful, sometimes they're disgusting or scary, or you don't want to look at them. And so I found it helpful to say the worms were what maybe I was working on. Over time, it was necessary to look at them every now and then. They were necessary to maybe help transform some of the core things about myself, my response to challenge. But I found it helpful when you and I would be talking there were days I didn't want to deal with the worms, and I would be able to signal to you, Ron, we ran into something and I'm not ready. And other times I would come into one of our sessions saying, this is the worm I want to work on today. And I just felt it's a very organic, way to look at coaching, one that let us grow and be flexible with, I think, what I needed, but also was helpful for the days that I just wasn't really open to looking at things, and it created a safe word and a way to explain quickly where I was. So.
Yeah, and I think I remember the importance of sort of setting the agenda for the day.
Yes.
Sometimes that was really important to help us move ahead for that session, what it was you wanted to get out of that session. Sometimes we put the worms off for a while.
Yes, we needed to, yes.
So that's a little bit about how the sessions went. Do you remember anything about kind of the work in between time? Because sometimes I feel like the important work is actually done at the time in between our meetings.
Yes, and in terms of the structure of our meetings, generally we would start out with what's happened since last time. So there were really two ways that I thought about work in between. One were things that I could do. Another metaphor we would use was my ability to zoom out of the moment and look at myself from the balcony. And often before I went into meetings that I knew would be challenging or tricky, I would create what I, in my mind, called balcony notes, which were just notes to myself. Often they were about, it would just say tone. So that I would go into the meeting conscious about tone, or it would say posture. As you know, sometimes when you're in a more aggressive space, you start leaning forward,
Right.
and people respond to that, so it would help me lean back. And I also began writing. So if I had a bad experience and I just couldn't unpack why it was bad, I often would just come and jot a few notes on a notepad or on my computer, how I felt in the moment, and I would refer to them just before we would meet to see if in the back of my mind I had really figured out things that felt bad or sometimes things that felt good, but I couldn't always figure out why. Then the other important in-between work was actually with people, my peers and even my supervisors. I was very open with them about the things I was working on or where I needed their affirmation. And in between sessions, I would often check in with them. I think sometimes we would even have jokes about some things I was working on, which gave a really light way for people to give positive or critical feedback, but in a way that made me feel like my peers were engendered in helping me grow. So I think between an ongoing conversation with my colleagues and my own just notes to myself to begin to check and understand myself, that was most of the work done in between.
So one of the things that I thought was really great about the way you used your colleagues was your accountability to them, your openness to kind of say, here's some of the things I'm working on, and then get their feedback. I think that was really useful in-time kind of feedback which you got that way, which I think really strengthened your engagement in the coaching experience.
Yes, and I think as a new leader and coming from a group of peers, I very softly leaned on that old relationship. I think it honored them and our relationship before I was their boss, but also, again, engendered them in my growth. And I think even though I was a supervisor, a leader, it created connection and, as you said, accountability, and gave them and us a script to talk about those things when I would hit some challenges. So they were very helpful. I also would add, often you would send me readings. So if you felt that you found something in your own kind of professional world that would relate to something we talked about, seeing it from someone else's point of view, but in a way I could relate, an article here or there, was helpful too. So I wanted to add that in terms of a in-between work. Yeah.
Well, as part of our the coaching engagement, we agreed to a 360 review where we worked on some questions together, sent those out to colleagues of yours, then I interviewed each of them individually, and then I put that together and shared in a confidential way so that nobody's particular comments were shared. Some of the themes of that, of kind of what the story is that people have about you, is a way to say that. Any reflections about that process, how that impacted your own growth as a leader?
Yes, it was one of my favorite exercises that we did, and really, particularly we did that as I was transitioning into a new role, so it was a great bookend to a journey of coaching, not just for myself, but for my team. I think it was a really concrete way where I put out there, and it was a step of vulnerability to ask for feedback from them that they really appreciated. I felt like their feedback was very thoughtful, and my own experience was that often the voices in our own heads or our perception of what people think are much more negative or critical. And I was truly blown away, and to this day sometimes look at those comments because they were much more positive, and I think because of two reasons. One would be because I did some real work and there was some real evolution there, but two, because the team that did the 360 was part of my coaching from the beginning. They also felt, again, part of the victory that I had, and wanted to, in many ways, celebrate what they saw. So I think that the primary message that I got from the 360, I think I was expecting more points to work on, and I think the more common message back was, you have made great progress and you know your own weaknesses, and keep on, but you're not far off from the mark. And that was so helpful and energizing. And as I said, to this day, I sometimes refer to that when I start, as we all do, kind of dropping in terms of when we think how we're performing. So.
So are you a different leader today than when you started?
There is no question I'm a different leader. I think the main difference would be my aura of calm. I have an immense amount of energy. I think to do humanitarian work, you must. But when you transition from being a field person who's running on adrenaline, you do that for 8 or 10 years, and then you become more a home-based manager, that energy has got to go somewhere. And when I started coaching, I really didn't know what to do with that energy anymore, and it would come out as negative or frustrated sometimes, or it would overwhelm a room even if it was positive. I think now I just sit back and laugh. In fact, last week I was somewhere where someone said, "You are just this grounded, anchored person," and I had to laugh because we know that is not always the case and not always true, and never would I have thought that I would have control over my energy to be, I was just going for a neutral presence, but to get affirmation in my new role as someone who is actually a presence of grounding and calm in a deep way, I appreciated, but I also had to laugh because that is just how far that element of who I am as a leader in person has transformed. And the second reason would be just my ability not to react. I might have only earned, we used to talk about 1 or 2 or 3 seconds of reaction time, but sometimes those few seconds are the difference between forward movement or backward movement, and as a leader, those are important seconds. And I see it not just in my professional life, but my personal life has made me extremely effective in terms of managing, again, kind of that energy, but also just being a thoughtful person and not letting emotion drive an immediate response. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this whole issue of leadership being the ability to choose a response, I think is so critical in terms of being an effective leader. Shannon, you've talked about a number of the ways in which coaching really was helpful for you. There's also some tough spots along the way, and I wonder, were there some times you remember being sort of coming up to a dead end, and like what was that experience like?
The most difficult experience was earlier on in the coaching. I think any time of reflection is challenging, and the first job is to discern between what in a situation are the things I need to own and what are things out of my control. I think that we hit a spot. I had a series of tough weeks with colleagues, with peers, and I was learning to become sharper in my vision. I knew where I was making decisions or reacting with little time of thought. I knew that I needed to take a breath and step back, go to the balcony, not take something personally, but those old reactions kept kicking in. And so it was this time early on where I was getting a sharper vision for the points, the levers of control that I had, that I was finding with coaching, kind of creating that space for reaction, but I would still fall back on my old ways of defensiveness or frustration. And so it's almost like torture, because I was more enlightened in some ways, but I didn't know how to use the new knowledge of myself to stop the old behaviors. Which again can also almost be worse than reacting without realizing it. I think that I really just leaned on you as our own relationship grew, and used the safe space to kind of back out of it slowly, put that rock with the worms down when I couldn't after a day, but come back at it when I was ready again.
What are some reasons somebody might want to look for a coach from your perspective?
Well, my first reaction would be, there's not a leader that doesn't need a coach.
Okay.
But for a more practical answer, I would say someone who is looking to grow in any way, someone who wants to advance, someone who wants to be more excellent, someone who's tired and burnt out and needs a place to reset, but you have to keep working at the same time. I think anyone who would meet any single or combination of the above who just wants to understand, grow, and be more excellent would find a coach quite helpful and transformative, I believe.
And do you have any ideas of what would you say would be the kind of things you should look for in a coach? Part of it's a match with different people, but are there some overarching things that you think of in terms of looking for a coach?
My best answer will be to tell you what I found in you and that I liked.
Okay.
So I would say someone who engenders immediate trust and safety. So for example, I responded immediately in that every time we would check in at the beginning of our sessions, in the time in between what's happened, you would often very positively affirm any work I did or reflections I had, even if I was reflecting on my own self-criticizing. Every session started positive, and I think any coach needs that to open up and engender the trust and the relationship that does exist between the coachee and the coach. That listening, I think you were very good at helping me hear myself kind of back. So I would speak for a while and you would pause and have me take a breath and say back to me what you heard me saying to make sure, I think, not only that you heard me correctly, but I would say that I heard myself and could hear what I would say. I felt that, for what it's worth, you were on my side. So again, in a challenging or political environment where I often felt I was always in a corner and I didn't know who was my ally or not on which day, I never questioned if my coach was on my side, even when I knew I maybe didn't perform the way I wanted or the way we discussed, or I was in a not particular place. Sometimes, even in the times between, I would know that my coach was there. What would my coach say as a helpful way to breathe? So I think the positivity, the trust, and for you again in particular, even just the calm demeanor. You could have a radio voice. You have that deep, slow voice that just really helps someone slow down and anchor when, again, you might be coming in kind of cranked up or ramped up or excited about work. Those are just a few of the qualities that I would say, or I have found to be really helpful in a coach.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I really appreciate you sharing some of your experiences with coaching. It's been a real pleasure for me to be alongside you, to work together with you, to collaborate in this engagement. So hopefully this has given you some better sense of what leadership coaching is about. And if this is something you'd like to explore further, I invite you to be in touch with me. I'd be happy to talk with you further. You can contact me through the website. I have the contact information is there, or you can contact me directly at ronfleming@gmail.com. And first session is a no obligation, no charge session. We can discuss what coaching might mean for you. Best wishes to you on your leadership journey. Thank you.